to Mike Stark from Peter Bell. Date March 27th. Arizona Silver pitch deck. A couple broad points to start, and then there's some brainstorming notes here. One key thing, every slide should basically stand alone, pulled out of context, which means enough identifying information of the company, the project, and everything to have some clue of what we're talking about if you were to just see that slide in isolation. The other thing is different slides for different purposes. So you've got the quick fact sheet, which has got pictures and basic information, and you should probably have some kind of a short pitch deck for broker trader types, and then you should have a longer one too. The shorter one and the longer one should probably be a Russian doll type situation where one of them fits inside the other, which is to say there shouldn't be a bunch of information in one that's not in the other, broadly speaking. So I'm going to do some brainstorming here to try and help figure out what kind of information I think should be in there, and then elaborate on what that looks like in the short version versus the longer one. It's useful to have some kind of a conceptual framework to hang this stuff on. The 8 P's of junior mining investing is pretty useful for that. Old Casey research thing that Marin Katusa wrote. Useful. But I'll take a stab at it without that for now. Thinking about the short version first. The stock and the company information. Good place to start. So, 1 year stock chart. Always useful. Maybe longer. Annotating on that, even potentially past financing rounds and kind of key news flow, potentially going back to when you started work on Philadelphia in this case. Makes for a busy slide, but stock performance, financings, summary, key news flow are really important interrelated things. The market perspective, key to address them. Also, shareholder base information, pie chart by type is a pretty classic piece of information. Some information on treasury, cash balance, spending obligations, also relevant in the stock page, believe it or not. And one of the things I love to see is something that Rudy Frank at Seabridge Gold always starts off with, which is kind of like, in his case, it's ounces discovered per share or over time or per dollar spent or something like that. Some kind of ratio or statistic showing the effectiveness of spending over time, basically. So that may not be possible in the case of Arizona Silver at this point to talk about resources in any way, a meaningful way really. But you can at least talk about G&A versus project spending, exploration budgets, right? So really still just talking about one slide, all stock information, some kind of information, or maybe break it out and it's a separate slide like Rudy does, That's with his longer presentations, but something about how much money in the past you've spent into the ground versus in overhead. You can get a little bit bogged down in the weeds on breaking apart that G&A spending. Maybe that's something to go into for the longer version, but in simple terms, I start with that. I generally put that stuff up front, all this stock information, because you are a public company and you're pitching investors. So start with what matters, which is really the stock and the money, I'm afraid to say. And then get into it, really, which is then get into the exploration work and all the stuff we really care about, I guess. Now, when it comes to exploration work, the business of the company, you can take it a few different ways. You can kind of start really broad and then zoom in, start with showing, hey, here's a project portfolio over Arizona, and progressively get more detailed. Or you can do it the other way around, and you can be like, look, here's our most meaningful recent accomplishment, boom, up front. And then, by the way, we've also got this other stuff that we did in the past. This stuff's waiting on some permits and blah, blah, blah. So, some debate around what the right way to go there is. Again, my preference is to make the most important thing, and put the most meaningful, most recent, ongoing, news and development up front. So start really focused, and then over time, through the deck, zoom out and kind of, as an afterthought, address Ramsey and Canyon, stuff like this. Sycamore Canyon. So, proceeding with that line, the first slides really in the pitch deck that I'd have for the short version would be that plan view map showing the, currently permitted holes, and on the other side of this next news release, the holes that have been completed in this latest round. Assuming results come back for the prior holes, you could, again, debate, do you put the results from the last holes up first, or do you put the current holes, the pending holes, and their explanation up first? So the relevant principle for that is a street adage that goes, buy on mystery, sell on history. So I know you're trying to sell the company, but really, if we want to hear about what's next first. The results that are known are important, but you gotta sell the sizzle, as they say, right? The mystery. And that's the results that aren't known yet. So here, March 27th, assuming that the results of the prior set of holes are back and published, and this new set aren't out yet, this is how I'd go with it. So I'd start with a slide so this is the first project slide I'm thinking about here. Title page is company name, contact information. Next page has a bunch of stock information. And then this is the third slide I'm talking about, okay? And on this one, I would put stuff like an image that shows a real tight plan view of the area of current drilling. And I would have the holes that have been completed marked out very clearly, and bold, and then I would have a little bit more subtle indication of holes that are permits pending. And for the holes that have been completed, I would try and overlay information about, trace of the drill hole if you can, right? Are these all vertical holes? Are they raking somewhere? Do we know? So a trace if you can. Plan view, it's a little nasty to try and get that in, but trace if you can. But please, depth information of the hole and stopping conditions, or some sort of visual information about, how much of the vein was drilled, or, when you got into granite, stuff like that. Something to give them some information to start working over in their minds, right? Again, this could even be VG counts, visible gold counts. So across what length of what intervals in which holes was a VG seen. I would put that in this slide, this first project slide. Boom, tight view, real focused up on the recent drilling completed at Philadelphia with results pending, okay? In addition to that image that has the plan view and some information about depth and intervals of the quartz vein and intervals of VG identified from inspection of the rock chips, I would have some descriptive information, a text that explains why you're drilling there and what the significance of it is from a project perspective. So there's several things that I'd note there. One of which is project overall 2.5 miles of vein at surface. That's known. And there's an old mine working called the Arabian mine, and that's known. And then I'd say something like, really the key thing is that we have drilled some fences stepping out along strike from the old mine, and these are the first sets of holes that are testing some kind of a theory of a fault offset, which is to say it's testing the continuation of the Arabian mine ore body. So you got to get that out there pretty quick because it's important and it raises lots of questions. Thinking about it from the broker's perspective, a lot of the questions are more kind of intellectual than market meaningful. So it's important to kind of stay focused here. But if you're able to position the significance of this current pending results for the project in that way, then you start to catch their attention, okay? And again, this language of fault, offset, continuation of the Arabian mine ore body. It allows you to tap into some of the stuff like the interview Greg Hahn did with the Arizona Geological, where he's talking about our exploration philosophy is searching for things undercover, or searching for things in fault offsets where the old timers lost it. So we really like old mines that dead ended and then they gave up, and we can see now with new technology where it was that they should have been looking, right? So I would honestly add that text to that slide, really. It's a lot to kind of jam in there, but if you can make a reference to that as like a core tenet of like our exploration philosophy, then it lets them know, look, this is supposed to be a repeatable process here, right? And then the other thing you might want to try and work into that as well is some explanation of why do we think the offset's there. And to be honest, you're probably better off leaving that as a hanging question at the bottom of the text box on that first slide, and then answering it on the next page with a map that is plan view, zoomed out, showing prior fences of holes overlaid with the magnetic survey. Okay? So go over all that stuff again in that first slide with a fine-tooth comb to find some of the text stuff that I mentioned. It's worth mentioning. Can't remember some of the phrasing that I had, but the key elements of that slide would be a very tight, narrow view in plan view of current drilling, with some indication of what was seen, just visual inspection of the rock chips, and then kind of text to support the idea that this is a pivotal test for a fault offset of continuation of the Arabian mine ore body. So the next slide after that, as I said, would be this kind of zoomed out plan view with prior drilling and magnetic survey showing the mag low in the area of the current drilling. On the image, I would make it very clear where you drilled and were skunked, where you drilled and hit granite early, or where you drilled and didn't hit any VG, or where, right? Those holes along strike of the Arabian mine that were kind of the extension of it, directly where you drilled and missed. Those are really important holes in this storyline, and I'd really emphasize those in this next slide to be like, look, we drilled here, and we missed. So something is up, and what is it? Well, without getting into details, it's epithermal magnetite destruction, and we got this mag low feature. It's kind of classical signature, and voila, here we see it off to the northeast. That's kind of the thrust of this next slide. And one other piece of information that would be really critical in there would be some information about the old Arabian mine. So production numbers from Arabian mine, just in summary, like head grade, do we know? Years of operation, do we know? Tonnage, ounces produced, right? Something to show what we're looking for here, basically. And that kind of old mine records information would be something to include on the sidebar text alongside the image. Other key elements to include in that would be some explanation of the holes that missed. It's a little tricky to do that, but not impossible, really. So try and do that, and then also this geophysical signature as well, just to mention it and put it written down that this mag low is a key signature that you look for here. And then the third slide in the sequence would be zooming out again. My preference would be zoom out wide enough to show your neighbor the placer mine next door, right? So don't zoom out and show the entire property yet. Just zoom out a little bit more, show the current area drilling, all the current, all the same information that you had in that first slide, and keep that on there. And the same information you had in the second slide, keep that on there, and zoom out one more time, and then really, really clearly show the area that is not your property, right? And specify that this is not our property. Specify that this is a private placer mining operation. Put a box around it and say, grade, question mark, production, question mark, and then put operating 2010 to 2020, right? Whatever the dates may be. 1990 to 2020, I don't know what they are, right? But that in itself tells a story. I'd overlay that text on the image, and then in the sidebar text I'd read something like current mining operation next door, at surface, placer, gold, private, production unknown, but ongoing. I would really like to see, if not, production numbers, at least some mention of what kind of circuit they're using, right? Like do we know if they're crushing? Do we know, is there any leaching going on? Or is it really just a gravity circuit, right? Some brief description to that effect. And a description of where they're getting their pay dirt, right? Even if the only thing you can say is locally sourced, right? Say that. And make the point that it's on strike, directly adjacent to the old Arabian mine, and that they're not doing any exploration at depth for the lode source at this point. I'd love to see something that says potential partnership, question mark, in there. It's not something that you have in hand, but it is something that you can use to create mystery and intrigue around the project from a pretty rational, like a broker, market-minded perspective, right? If you guys have success drilling off something at this northeast extension, and there's that southwest extension, and Buddy's already mining there, it's, come on, at some point that takes on a different hue, a different look to everybody involved on the ground there. And it may have been that, look, we couldn't come to terms in the past, couldn't get a deal together, but in a bull market things look different, and with a gold discovery under your belt things look different. So it's a case of kind of putting what you want out there, right? Don't say that you want a deal or that you have a deal, but just put a flag in it as a question, I would say. It's going to raise some questions, but they're good questions, and if you can't say anything about it, that's fine too. It'll give you a chance to show your mettle to the brokers you're talking to about being tight-lipped. They might get angry at you for teasing them, but that's okay. And then the next slide in the series obviously would be zoomed out to show the entire Philadelphia property, right? And keeping it short and sweet for the brokers here, you're going to want to highlight results noted on the map, and Thumb Butte too. There's an old mine there, I believe. You may want to mark that out and give some indication of production history, even if it's off the Arizona Silver land package, I still want to hear about it. If it's 200 meters away, if it's, you know, if it's nearby, it's a kilometer away, I still want, you know, if it shows up on that zoomed out plan view at all, I want to hear about it, right? So all this local production and exploration records, boom, the more you got, the more you should put on that final view of the project, the entire project, right? And yeah, I would like to see, you know, again, that line tracing out the 2 miles of strike that is known at surface. That's useful as well. Can start to become a little bit of a busy image, but that's okay. This slide, I would say, really turns on the text that you include. And the text I would include would be something about overall project strategy. What's the plan of attack here? And I would keep it simple. I would say, so far, key test has been this fault offset of the Arabian ore body, brackets, results pending. And then, you know, there's a bunch of other stuff, right? Conditional on success, defining, you know, and hitting ore in this new zone. There's additional work justified there at some point. Throw out a number of meters drilled that you know you'd like to see put into that area. You know, is it 10,000 meters of drilling you'd like to do around there? Into, you know, what kind of a volume, right? Do you have a sense of how far it strikes on property you have there, you know, before you get to the highway, right? Like, how much runway do you have to put in drilling? How much drilling would you like to do? So something about that, just to start with, to say that, you know, there's this key test, this results pending, and then on the other side of that, if it's successful, this is the kind of work we would like to do around there, assuming best case scenario. Then you also have to talk about other priority areas or plans, work programs that you could do around the property. This is a big one. To my mind, this is where you'll catch them or you'll lose them, because the brokers will look at these results you have pending now and say, wonderful work, good job. So what? You know, I missed it. I think a lot of them will say, you know, it's what, you want me to buy now? That's a pretty risky, you know, binary outcome. I'm not buying any drill plays, not at this price, where, you know, if you were half off from where you are, maybe blah, 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 right? So there's all these reasons that I think the brokers and the guys on the street will like the story that you're talking about with regards to this extension, but they'll look at the highway right there and they'll say, oh, it doesn't have that much room to get bigger and blah, blah, blah. So you'll get a lot of pushback and a lot of no just off of that thesis on its own from people who are looking for stuff that has the potential to be bigger, right? And if the only thing you have to give them is just that one test and then delineating something there, it's not really enough to get most of the guys too worked up. But the thing that will trigger the hand-to-wallet reflex is when you start talking about repeating it a few times down strike to the southwest away from the highway along the old highway that's since been closed. That's where we really get into some interesting stuff, right? Because we know access is good down there, and you got a lot of room to work and a lot of prospective areas. So that is the spot where you really, to my mind, have to sell them a lot of upside, exploration upside. And what you communicate about what you would do down there is really important. So if you just say, yeah, we might do some soils here, we might do some rock chips there, you know, we've done a lot already. That's not it, right? That's not going to get them excited. What they really want to know is that you as a junior are focused on massive discovery, right? We don't need you to drill something off into 43-101 standards yet. We need you to find another one, right? And I think that the land package you have in the district you're in has that potential. And if you can convey that in a way that doesn't make them fearful of you blowing the share count up with reckless spending, geologists with a checkbook syndrome, right? Then you have a chance there. So what do you want to say about how you're going to tackle the rest of the land package? It's a tough one. Again, if you just discount it and say, oh, we've already done it and we'll get to it at some point, that's not the right answer. If you say, oh, we're going to go out and drill every target that we have already, see, that's not the right answer, right? Too expensive. So you got to talk about how you're going to generate a lot of exploration results for a little bit of money. And if I had my way, the best case scenario I think would be around that, go down that. Simplest thing I would think would be you go along those 2 miles, you do a bunch of trenching along the way, like get a bunch of rocks, 10 kilos here, 10 kilos there, hit it with the XRF, or, do some VG count, and then, do some mini bulk sampling, sending it to the neighbor, the placer thing. That's probably asking for too much. It's not really something you can include in this pitch deck. It might even be too much for their minds to comprehend. It might sounds like it's an overreach or a distraction from your main work at the Arabian extension. So a more realistic way to communicate this point might be to mention some prospecting program whereby you're gonna visit I don't want to say it, but you're gonna visit the entire 2 mile stretch, and you're gonna go along the whole thing, and you're gonna have some criteria for taking samples from various spots and then sending them off to the lab. It's not really my preferred way because it's expensive and it's slow, but I'd rather hear we're gonna there's this, we really like to see calcite and quartz together. We don't care so much how wide it is at surface, but we got this visual criteria that we know, and so we're going to go along and inspect along this 2 miles. We're going to walk it again, send the geos out there, and when as we walk it, we're going to mark areas we like. And when we have finished going over it a couple times, we found these areas, we got the top 10 spots. We're going to go back and we're going to hit those with, you could say channel samples, but I'd rather hear more than that. I want you to take more rock than just a little saw cut across perpendicular. You know, I really want you to do a box cut or a channel sample along the strike. You know, I know you're not supposed to do that, but I want you to get more rock out. The key is that you got to get some rock out of these areas of interest, right? Supposing you do that, whether it's jackhammers or saws or whatever you do, then you can look at some visible gold counts again, right? So are you seeing any VG in these things? That may be the next stage, right? First stage is you walk it. Second stage is you know, go back to your favorite spots and dig out some rocks, check for VG at each of them. Third stage, you know, the ones where you see VG, send those for fire assay, right? That's a prospecting program I can get behind, right? It's potentially a little slow, but it's pretty high confidence that you're sending good material to the lab, and it's pretty low cost because, you know, geologist day rate and whatever it costs to do some saw cuts or whatever you're going to do to get the samples, right? The caveat in that might be, are you actually going to see VG in quartz from surface? I don't know. Assuming that you are, that in itself is a great story, because if you describe in detail that prospecting program with the 3 stages, walk the whole thing, find the spots you like, go back, muck some rock, check for VG, spots where you find some VG, send some samples off to the labs. That 3-stage program, a lot of people on the street won't believe you that program will yield anything. But if you ran that over your entire 2.5 mile stretch, you know what? You might find 2 spots, 3 spots that have grade. Perfect. You know, that's what we're looking for. We're not looking for 20 target areas at this point, right? We can't handle that. That's too much. But if we can find 2 or 3 or 5 or 1 good one, if you find 1 that runs ounce per ton, big win. Big win. You know, because like, what's the cost of that whole prospecting program going to be? 100 grand US, you know, maybe more with the lab cost, maybe 200 grand, right? So it's potentially low cost, high impact, and it's also something of like the brokers and stuff be like, well, I don't believe you about that. And so the guys who, you know, who'll be like, oh, they don't believe you, you know, that you can at least end that conversation on a, well, you know, keep tabs on us, right? And when we do report grade from a prospecting program, you know, what's your name again? Here, I'll make sure to call you up and let you know when those results come out, because they're going to come out. And if we get skunked, I'll eat some crow and I'll tell you what we're going to do next, blah, 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 right? So at least keeps the conversation going with some of those brokers who will give you no, and the other brokers who are understanding of the kind of system you're working on will look at that program and be like, look, you got legs beyond whatever you get in drilling. So there's multiple kicks at the can, there's multiple legs for this story to stand on, and you're not gonna, it's not a high spending, high cost exploration program, right? You're in Arizona. It's a little bit of a long explanation there, but that's what I would do with that last slide. I would really zoom out all the way, show the entire project on the map, show all the work that's been done, all the old mines in the area, all the exploration results on the project, and then have this text box that explains what your plan of attack is at the Arabian extension, and then what your plan of attack is for the rest of the project, right? And again, for that 2-mile extension, I'd think about a 3-stage prospecting plan, walk the whole thing, muck some bits you like, check for VG, and then send the bits that have VG off to the lab. with the goal of identifying 2 or 3 spots with grade at surface. And again, I'd really like to hear some detailed information about what kind of drilling you would do in the Arabian Extension, in what kind of a search space, you know, how big do you think the footprint of that thing could be, right? If you get into it, height, depth, width, length, dimensions, you know, some rough estimate of that, of what kind of, and how much drilling you would put into that area. And then there's a few more slides. The next one obviously being the zooming out to show the state of Arizona with all the projects. Text, short description for each one, and something about the concept for all of them. Start at Philadelphia and say, finding the lost continuation of the Arabian mine and finding repeats along strike the 2 miles search space. Sycamore Canyon, say forest lands waiting for drill permits, results, prior results, high grade gold, silver. And then the other one, say lead, zinc, silver, back burner. And then again, the overall concept being looking for extensions of old mines in Arizona that were lost to the old timers by fault offsets or cover. Nice slide, simple. Add that after the series of ones on Philadelphia. I wouldn't add anything more than that on Sycamore or the other one. And then the other, after that, I would zoom out even more and have a slide that's just why Arizona. Something about the mining history of the state and something about the future as well. Just saying, look, in a time of turbulence globally, you want to be in the best places in the world. The mainland USA, believe it or not, is one of the best places in the world for mining, period. It's also some of the worst places, right? We don't want to, we don't really want to be in California here, right? But Arizona, game on. So you don't really want to put California down so much in that slide, saying that explicit, but finding some way to convey Arizona, why Arizona, right? Why USA? Something about just some, maybe, so, and maybe the images from that is a series of newspaper clippings stacked up, saying, oh, Arizona this, Arizona that, maybe over 100, 150 years, talking about the mining history and the mining industry in Arizona, setting records and this and doing that and employing this many people and employing that. And then I don't quite know what images to use there, and I don't know quite what text, but something to say, why Arizona? And then the last slide after that, why gold, right? Why gold is really the slide. So why gold? Again, newspaper clippings probably do a good job there. Something from that Dan Oliver, Myrmican, I don't know what his name of his fund is, but he's had a good article and good coverage of the gold space. Arizona Silver's been tweeting out stuff from a Kitco interview he did. That's cool. What else, right? In Gold We Trust, classic stuff. Clip some stuff out of there, slap that up there. Again, newspaper headlines, cuttings, US 5 trillion, $10 trillion, whatever the number is in their spending, and Bank of Canada quantitative easing, blah, blah, blah. There's lots of different stuff that you can put up there about why gold. That should be in there, I think. Why Arizona, and then why gold, again, kind of stepping back. And after the Y gold, I would bring it right back to one more slide, final slide, drill results, tables of select intersections. So stuff from Philadelphia where we think we've drilled what the old timers would have called ore. Do we have any of that yet? Ideally, I want to see a side-by-side comparison of production records from this level of the mine, that level of the mine. If we have that detail of information of, this stope yielded this production, the volume of ore that they mined, and then to compare some of the stuff that we're drilling today. If you can do a side-by-side comparison at the end of what the old timers were mining, kind of on a very, very detailed level, not just mine average, historical production average, but real level, this level of this mine produced this grade and this tonnage, and boom, here we are drilling at a similar depth, and we intersected this grade over this interval. That would be, to me, to be clear, production records from the Arabian mine and drill intersections from drill results that have been reported to date. If you can line up those side by side, that is a very powerful image conceptually. I don't know if I would put an image in there along with it, or if it's just a table of data. I don't know what kind of text phrasing to put in on that, but less is more, really. Again, this is the broker audience. It's pretty short and quick. We're really trying to make an impact here. Don't let the facts get in the way of a good story. And the good story is, this is the old mine, and this is what we're drilling. It's similar. Keep it simple, right? So I wouldn't go into detail on every interval we've intersected and every level of the mine production, but some of the juiciest stuff, the best stuff that they had in the mine, and some of the best stuff we've had in drilling. If we can show that they're in the ballpark, that is the capstone that I would put at the end to really hammer it home. And if they've stuck with us that long, then it's like, okay, that brings it home, brings it back to the project, brings it back to the current drilling. This question of how much more could there be, right? And then some questions about mineability. Those are the thoughts that come up from that. I wouldn't get into that. We're not at that stage where we can talk about mine planning or anything really in a pitch deck yet. But if you can talk about grades in drilling that are commensurate with what historical production was, and you can say it's because it was offset by a fault, and our whole philosophy on exploration is those kinds of scenarios, boom, it all fits together. It's really tight and it makes a lot of sense. And it is, convincing to some people. It's not going to get everybody. There's all different kinds of people out there, but at least it makes a lot of sense, and it's discreet, short, sweet, and memorable. So I'm going to put those two different audio files that I have together here and upload them onto YouTube so I can get a transcript, and then I'll go about drafting up some documents to show kind of roughly what I'm thinking of. And just to run through it again, there's a title slide, there's a tight view of Philadelphia current drilling, there's a zoomed out view showing current drilling in the old mine, there's a zoomed out view showing current drilling in the old mine, the placer next door, and then there's a zoomed out view showing the entire Philadelphia project, and then there's another zoomed out view that shows Arizona, then there's a slide that says why Arizona, and then there's a slide that says why gold, and then there's a slide that says hour intervals versus historic production. And that, by my count, is 9 slides. So, you want to talk about doing it in 10 slides. 10 slide deck is a good rule of thumb I like to talk about for short investor pitches. You may have one more slide that you could work with in there if you really want to. I would not do... Oh, well, I might have missed the stock corporate information slide, so that might be the 10th slide. Hence why I'm recording all this and going to get a transcript up so I can follow my thoughts through and figure it out. Obviously, this is something I'm kind of coming up with on the fly, brainstorming as I go and talking myself through it. That's why it takes an hour to describe what is a 10 slide pitch deck. But, hopefully with some kind of a rigorous foundation that makes sense to a broad investing audience here. And, all the stuff I'm talking about here, it's all just public information, right? Like, I don't know anything non-public. The Arizona guys are pretty tight-lipped about that, which is good. So at some point I may share this recording or the transcript or the slide deck draft that I make from this. I may share that publicly just to give people a sense for what my process is too, because people don't really know me like this. I don't really do a lot of this kind of stuff, helping people draft pitch decks. But it's a fun thing to do. And this Arizona Silver story has enough going on where to me, it's like, yeah, let's go. It's exciting. I like it. And looking at their current pitch deck here recently, it's not very good, right? Like, there's a lot of stuff on the other two projects in there, which is a distraction. And the stuff on Philadelphia is, factually correct and accurate, but not promotional. The things that they say when they're talking to people about the pitch deck in a conversation may be enough to get people excited. They may be able to say the right things or say something that's interesting to people. But I don't see a lot of that stuff in the deck as a standalone. And to me, that's a problem, because a lot of people just look at the pitch decks and they don't ever call anybody to have them talk them through it. Some investors do, but a lot of people, they just flip through the deck on their own and they don't really they don't really spend a lot of time looking at it. And if the stuff isn't really simple, they're not going to be drawn into doing more work on it. So again, it comes back to my whole idea of different decks for different purposes. This deck I'm describing is really just an intro deck for a broad audience. It should be short and sweet, punchy, memorable, and accurate and promotional. There should be another deck that has much greater detail. I would not be upset if that other deck is 50 slides or 100 slides, depending on how much material you have, you can talk about. Just to mention briefly, that other deck should go into project detail, everything that we know about Philadelphia. I want it documented, described exhaustively in this longer pitch deck. And so project specific and district region specific, I want to know. I think that document should have stuff about the Oatman district in Arizona, some of the features of the other mines in the area, what's happening today versus what's known historically. What were the old timers looking at? How did they do their prospecting? What kind of stuff is going into production today? Detailed information describing the history of the district, I think, should also be in there. It's very important context for the project. And maybe more information on the company history as well in that longer deck. So more information on the people involved, past financings, past news releases. There's some overlap with that and the inventory of project information, but there's also some differences. So, it gets a little murky and a little bit complicated to describe precisely what I mean, and all that, but basically just everything, including the kitchen sink, kind of in that longer deck. We don't need printouts of old news releases, but we do need clippings of headlines of old news releases and timelines in that longer deck. Really, that longer deck is all about telling the longer story, right? If we're talking about the history of the district over 150 years, I want to hear also about the history of Arizona Silver as a company over a year, 2 years, 5 years, 20 years. I don't know. How long has it been in Pubco? Who's been in charge of it, right? Where did the shell come from? These kinds of questions are things that are relevant to the stock today as a speculation, and there's a place for them in a longer deck. And there is an audience for that kind of information. And a lot of the content's pretty much evergreen too, so you can kind of do that deck once, let it sit, update it, every once in a while as new results come out, but not substantial updates, small changes really as things go. Whereas the shorter pitch deck really is a snapshot in time, and 6 weeks later, depending on news flow, that short pitch deck could look dramatically different, right? Like if the company strikes out at the drilling to the northeast, what then, right? Like, does that whole concept exploration thesis of that area get killed off, right? Like, what does that mean for the pitch deck? Is it a pivot to all this stuff to the southwest on this 2-mile extension? Maybe. I don't know. But depending on news flow, that short pitch deck, I think, has to change a lot more than the longer one. So they're kind of different purposes, much different audiences. And, again, it's possible that even that longer pitch deck isn't just one long pitch deck. It could be that it's two or three pitch decks, presentations, whatever, depending. And I understand that that's somewhat unconventional. Most companies kind of have one corporate presentation that they use. And I find that it tries to speak to several different audiences and ends up missing most of them most of the time. So rather than having one pitch deck that has a little bit of technical information and a little bit of generalist information, please have a technical pitch deck for a technical audience and a generalist pitch deck for a generalist audience. Different things for different purposes. And the more information and the more perspective and context you can include in them, the better, because these junior mining companies are really, kind of research and development businesses. So a lot of the stuff around the people matters, the history matters, and the classic line that it's drill steel and shoe leather that makes junior mining stocks into winners, right? Trying to give some sense of that in the pitch decks is key, right? And just a neutral, neutered, sanitized presentation doesn't do that. The presentation should either feel like a bunch of burnt boot leather on the short one, running around the city, or it should feel like a bunch of spent drill bits. Just from being out in the field, going through thousands and hours of time at the drill rig. So, thank you very much. End it here now. Peter Bell, March 27th, 2020. Note for Mike Stark from Arizona Silver. Goodbye.